President, thank you for receiving me.
And welcome.
Such a pleasure to be in Nairobi.
Welcome to Nairobi.
Glad to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's not your first time in Nairobi?
Yes, it is. Years ago.
Yes.
We could not meet the dates.
Yes.
Today I'm here.
Wonderful.
Such a beautiful day here.
Hello, how are you? Thank you very much and welcome to Nairobi.
Thank you. This is my senior minister of state.
Okay, thank you very much and welcome to Nairobi.
This is my senior minister of state too.
Very good.
President, thank you for
Thank you very much and welcome. Digitization of the economy and government services in all sectors is an enabler for our bottom-up economic transformation agenda. We want to run an efficient and paperless economy and society. A collaboration between Kenya and Singapore, who have a history of innovation, is key, hence the inclusion of the ICT sector in our strategic partnership between our two countries. I am happy to inform you that His Excellency Loong and I witnessed the signing of 3 memoranda of understanding on ICT, which will facilitate cooperation on cybersecurity, digitization of government services, ICT capacity building, among the other areas. We also signed another MOU on skills development to facilitate collaboration in human resource capacity building for civil servants and students, particularly in specific areas that need to support a sustainable socioeconomic development priorities, especially the ones we have identified in Kenya. As we all understand, the TVET space is the engine for providing the human capital necessary to assist us in driving our Vision 2030 and our economic development blueprint as a government. We have also agreed that the bilateral investment treaty signed between our two nations on 12th June 2018 be immediately operationalized. We further directed our respective ministers to conclude negotiations on avoidance of double taxation within the shortest time possible. And we believe this will spark and grow trade and investment opportunities between Kenya and Singapore. We have also agreed to actively explore methods of acquiring knowledge and support from Singapore's highly prosperous housing model. Kenyans are currently engaged in the housing debate, with approximately 6.5 million Kenyans lacking affordable and decent housing. Singapore has one of the most successful stories on matters of public housing. The Prime Minister has informed me that 85% of all Singaporeans live in decent, affordable public housing. Their story and journey did not start overnight. It began 60 years ago, around the same time we established our housing policy in Kenya. They took some hard decisions and made some sacrifices where they undertook mandatory savings, and the results are there for everyone to see. We are 60 years late in taking this bold step. As a result, our country is infamous for having some of the largest informal settlements that number in excess of 1,140 slums. I don't want us to postpone this agenda anymore, and thus I am asking Kenyans to make the choice by saving into the housing fund so that 60 years from now, we can also have a similar success story to tell. Part of the agreements that we have signed today, whether it's the bilateral investment treaty and what we are working on the avoidance of double taxation, are part of the instruments that we will leverage on to encourage the private sector investment and trade between our two countries, so that what Prime Minister Lee rightfully describes as very low trade volumes, we can be able to scale our trade, scale our investment, and begin the journey to leverage the imbalance between our trade. And secondly, it is a clear signal to us in Kenya that we need to do more about our exports. As we are all aware, our exports as a percentage of GDP came down from 28% to 10%. It is the reason why we are expanding our county industrial and aggregation centers. It is the reason why we will have new 5 export promotion zones in the Republic of Kenya, because exports as a percentage of GDP is even reflected in the trade between us and Singapore. There is scale, there is scope for us to export more, not just into Singapore, but to the rest of the world. But value addition and agro-processing will play a big part of our ability to be able to export. And that is why the bottom-up economic transformation agenda is focused on ensuring that we build the necessary capacity for us to do value addition and for us to engage in agro-processing, so that our flowers, our coffee, our tea, our avocados can find their way into Singapore. And I want to thank Prime Minister Lee for agreeing that Singapore can be the gateway into the Southeast Asia and the whole of that region. So we are building the necessary blocks on our side, and we are building the necessary ecosystem together with Singapore to facilitate increase in trade. If there is one phenomena that is urgent and that poses an existential threat to humanity, it is climate change. And the MOU we have signed today speaks to some of the solutions that will inform our action towards solving global warming and every country meeting their nationally determined contributions. We are changing the conversation from one of finger pointing and blame game, and we are moving it away from who caused what. We are having a conversation about climate financing, about climate investment. How do we work together to ensure that we support Singapore to meet their nationally determined contribution, but in the process, they too help Kenya to manage the extreme situations that come with climate change in our region. So the carbon trading market is an answer to climate financing and climate investment. And that is the new paradigm, and that is the new space that Singapore and Kenya are leading. Just for the record, 25% of all carbon trading going on in Africa today happens in Kenya. So we are already a leader in the space of carbon trading. And the partnership that we're going to build with Singapore is not only going to speak to scaling up our carbon trading, because I already announced that our next biggest export from Kenya will be carbon credits. We are concluding the legislation around that particular aspect in the next month or so. I will be speaking to members of parliament to explain to them the opportunity that exists for our country in the space of carbon trading, so that we can work with countries like Singapore and others in the space of carbon credit and carbon trading. So that's the new language for the future, especially in the context of climate change.
I thank President Ruto for his warm hospitality and his warm words. this is my first official visit to Kenya, and I'm delighted to be here today. Despite being geographically quite distant, Singapore and Kenya have similar outlooks. Our peoples share similar aspirations, such as inclusive growth, a high standard of living, ethnic and religious harmony, and good housing, healthcare, education. We share similar views on the challenges faced by the Global South. We both worry about growing geopolitical tensions, rising protectionism, threats to the multilateral trading system, inflation, pandemics, and climate change. We agreed that it was important that countries continue to work towards building linkages in the digital economy, cooperating on food, energy security, and sustainable development. The President and I reaffirmed the warm and long-standing relations between Singapore and Kenya. 2 years ago, we celebrated our 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations, and our two countries cooperate and exchange experiences in areas such as governance, public service administration, urban planning, and livable cities. Our economic cooperation has been growing. Kenya is one of Singapore's important trading partners in sub-Saharan Africa. Despite COVID, bilateral trade in 2021 increased by almost a quarter year on year. Several Singapore companies are operating in Kenya in a variety of sectors: shipping, logistics and port management systems, agribusiness, hospitality and fintech solutions, amongst others. A delegation of Singapore companies is in Nairobi. They came with me to pursue opportunities for investments and partnerships with Kenyan companies. Our two countries also collaborate well in multilateral fora. President Ruto and I reaffirmed our shared commitment to multilateralism and a rules-based global order. Singapore and Kenya agreed to continue our cooperation at the UN and other multilateral co-organizations, and to cooperate on UN reform to enhance its effectiveness. We discussed new areas of cooperation, first on information and communication technologies. We just signed an MOU in this area, which will allow both sides to exchange best practices and knowledge in ICT and promote talent development and innovations. The MOU will also facilitate and strengthen strategic cooperation in cybersecurity. Secondly, on climate change, we signed an MOU in carbon credits collaboration under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and this will encourage, develop, and facilitate collaborative carbon credit projects of mutual interest. International collaboration, such as this agreement between Singapore and Kenya, is critical to promoting global climate action to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Third, on human capital development. Both our countries placed heavy emphasis on nurturing talent. The MOU on skills development will encourage closer technical cooperation between both countries in areas such as leadership and governance, education, and digitalization. And this will take place through knowledge exchange, capacity building courses, and other cooperation. There is great potential to expand our bilateral cooperation. Kenya's strategic location serves as a gateway for Singapore companies into East Africa. Likewise, Singapore can serve as a gateway for Kenyan companies into Southeast Asia. I welcome the ratification of the Bilateral Investment Treaty and the President's commitment to settle the avoidance of the double taxation agreement between our two countries as soon as possible. These moves send a strong positive signal to businesses and provide clarity and assurance on the cross-border transactions and investment. I look forward to working with President Ruto and his government to bring our bilateral relations to even greater heights. I'm very happy that the President has accepted my invitation to visit Singapore, and I look forward to receiving him before too long, and if all goes well, early next year. Thank you very much.